Hello and welcome. My name's Zolf, and it's my pleasure to take you on a guided tour of Arcion for real-time data movement. Now, Arcion is an in-memory, multi-threaded replication solution allowing you to move petabytes of data at scale in an efficient manner. Arcion allows you to connect to relational data stores that could reside on-premise or in the cloud and deliver this downstream to a database, a data warehouse, or a cloud technology. Now, Arcion comes in two different flavors. There's the self-hosted, which allows you to deploy Arcion on-premise or within your own VPC, which you'll manage. Or there is a self-managed cloud offering where everything's managed by Arcion itself. Now, for today's demo, we're going to be using the self-hosted version. I've deployed Arcion on my laptop. I'll be connecting to Snowflake as a source, and we'll be taking some existing data and change data and delivering this downstream into an on-premise SQL Server instance. Now, for those of you that have seen demos of Arcion already, will have noticed that we're using the UI. This demo is going to be focused on the client side. So if you haven't seen the demo yet of the UI, I encourage you to do so before you view this. This demo will be solely focused on the client side of things. But before we move on to the demo, I just want to go through some commonalities between the UI and the client itself. Now, as we go through the process of creating the data flow within Arcion, how we do it in the client is the same as what we do in the UI. However, in the UI, you may not notice this in detail because it happens in the background. We just guide you through the whole process. The client is the same principle as well. Even though we're manipulating some files, we're just inputting details of how we want to connect. So it's seamless in the client as well as the UI itself. So first of all, when connecting the data flow, we want to know, how do we want to move the data? What mode do we want to move it in? Snapshot will just move historical data, existing data in your source tables. Real-time will only move change data capture from the logs itself. So anytime there's a change in the database, it's logged in the database logs, and we will capture from there. Full is giving you snapshot plus real-time. So once we've finished doing the initial load, we'll initiate the change data capture to start capturing changes. Delta snapshot is basically taking frequent snapshots with a timestamp. So rather than moving all the data again, with a delta snapshot, we will only move data that's changed between the two different time points. On the target, we have replace. So we want to build the schema, we want to build the tables, and we want to apply new data to that. So regardless of what's existing in the structure, we'll create everything from scratch. Truncate will allow you to preserve your schema, but if there's any data in there, we'll truncate it and apply new data. Append will allow you to keep the schema and keep existing data, and we'll just apply new data as we see. So again, like the UI, these options are available to you in the client, and we'll see how that works later on in the demonstration itself. Now, this is the workflow that's taken in sequential order, and it's the same like the client. So for those of you that have seen the client, you'll notice that we have to go through the process of setting up a source, setting up a target connection. The extractor and plier, we'll go through that in a while, but again, those are not mandatory fields, and then the filter and mapper. So first of all, source connection. How do we connect to Snowflake in this instance for the demonstration? We need to provide details of how we connect to that technology. Likewise, with a target connection, we need to provide information how we're going to connect to the target. Then we have the extractor. Now, the extractor, as I mentioned earlier on, is not mandatory. Extractor and applier are typically performance tuning parameters to instruct Arcion how many threads we want to spin up. As I mentioned, it's multi-threaded replication solution. There's other fields that we can also put in there, but that's normally to govern performance tuning or anything additional outside of the basics of what we configure within the default parameters. Again, applier is more for the target side of things, extractor on the source. And then we have filter. So this is telling Arcion what is it that we actually want to replicate from the source. So again, we can be very granular with Arcion. We don't have to replicate the entire database. We can be granular at the schema level, table, column, even down to row level as well. We can also tell Arcion that we may want to include some tables, but block some tables as well. And then finally, we have mapper. Now, Arcion does all the hard work for you, which we'll show you in this demonstration itself. And when we go in heterogeneous, we also apply default mappings between different technologies For table names, column names, we tend to keep it like for like. Same with data type mappings. We will convert the data type mappings depending on what the technologies are. But here we can actually manipulate some of this information. So if we want to change different table names, schema names, column names, we can do this within the mapper. Okay, so I haven't explained the workflow, the configuration workflow for the client. Again, this is the same as the UI. It's just done in the background without having to think too much about it. But let's go ahead and look at the demonstration itself. So the client is on Linux. So I've got an installation in here. So we've downloaded the product, and you can see in the directory where I've created the version number. I've applied the software in here. And to install Arcion, very simple. All we do is unzip the file. Once we unzip the file, it will create a home directory called replicant-client. So let's go ahead and look at that directory. Okay, so we have some subdirectories in here. Now, the main ones that we're going to be focused for the configuration side of things is the configuration or the conf directory, the mapper directory, and the filter directory. So let's go ahead and look at the conf directory. In here, you'll see connection. This will contain information of how to connect to your sources and targets. So there's two right now. So we've got Snowflake _ SRC source, and then SQL Server _ DST destination. So very quickly, let's have a look at these files. So you can see here from a configuration point of view, these YAML files are templates. All we need to do from a user perspective is just input the information that's required. So for connecting to Snowflake, the URL, the port number, and the warehouse, and then the user information or user credentials to connect. And that's simply all we do from a source perspective. Likewise, we can also look at SQL Server target connection. So likewise, again, we're just inputting the parameters to connect to SQL Server, the host machine where that's residing on my virtual machine, the port number, and user credentials. You'll notice I've used SA. For demonstrations, that's easy purposes. In production, we would not recommend using such elevated privileges. You can create a normal replication user and assign the specific privileges required in order to apply data to SQL Server. All this is documented under our documentation. So no need to use such elevated privileges. Okay, let's go back to the directory. So that's my source and target connection. I'm just going to go back one directory. And then we talked about having the extractor and apply parameters. Now, as mentioned, that's not mandatory. Typically in the demonstrations, you'll see defaults. However, if you want to manipulate some performance tuning, you can make changes to that. And those files will reside in two directories, SRC for source and DST for destination. So let's move into SRC list here, and you can see that there's just one file in here, which I've titled Snowflake. Now you can give this any naming convention. Just remember what you call it, because we'll be using that a bit later on. So again, in here, I can just look at the configuration. So as I mentioned, we've got some default values in here, which I tend to stick with snapshot information in real time, how many threads are spun up. Again, you can change the configuration here. Some of this has been commented out. Again, if we want to use this, we can uncomment them and make changes to the input in here. So here are basically the same per table configuration. We're going to be using the catalog ZQ_DB. It's a public schema, and it's a movies table that we're interested in. So for performance tuning, again, I'm going to stick with default and move on. S-L. Okay, we're going to go back one directory. And we can see we've got the target destination. Likewise, destination is the same. It's going to be the same, pretty much same configuration file, how many threads you want to spin up on the target, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not going to go with that. We've seen what source and target looks like. What we're going to do is go back one more directory. And here we're going to have a look at the filter and mapping directory as well. So let's go to filter. And there is one file in here for Snowflake filter. So again, let's just have a look at that. What we're doing here, as I mentioned, is we're telling Arcion what is it that we want to replicate from Snowflake into SQL Server. So we've got my DB that's there, and for tables, I've listed out the movies table. So we're just going to be focused on that one table today, just for demonstration purposes. But here I'm actually being granular about what I want to replicate. Okay, let's go back one directory. And then the last one we want to look at is the mapper directory. And here we can see we've got one file here. So the mapper is going to tell Arcion exactly how to map from source to target itself. So again, we're going to just do a cat. And you can see he was saying from the target, there's a database called testdb2, owner is DBO. On the source, the data resides in ZQ_DB, and it's within the public scheme itself. So that's the mapping rule that we've got. So there is something specific downstream in SQL Server where I want the data to go into, which is a database called testdb2. Okay, and that's it. That's all we're doing. We're manipulating each of these files, input specific instructions, and like the UI, as it guides us through of building a workflow, it tells us, right, what information do we need to connect to source, target, any mapping, any filtering. Same principles are here with the client, as easy as that. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go back. I can't remember how many screens is it? Yep, into the client. So the client dash, the replicant dash client is our root directory. Everything works from this directory itself. So again, I'm just going to do -L, and we can see all those files here. So this is where we actually start executing the files in order. But before I do, I just want to have a look at the environments. So here, as I mentioned, Snowflake. As we go through Snowflake, as mentioned in the slides, how do we want to move the data so we can do full, replacing downstream? How do we connect to the source environment? So here, we're just going to look at this. Why I wanted to show this is because, again, the steps are exactly the same, but for Snowflake, there are some prerequisites on the source side that you must do in order to enable CDC. So the two steps here is create a streams for each table. Instructions are provided of how that is created. So on the right-hand side, you can see this is all documented, not only within the UI, but you'll also find the same documentation on our website as well. So here it will give you instructions of what you need to create a stream. And then after a stream, we need to create stage tables. And all this is for each table that you want to do CDC for within Snowflake. Now, I told you we were using movies table as an example. I can just make sure if my connection works. And this is the same connection parameter I've used within the client as well. And everything's passed. So we know connection to Snowflake will work. Right, so having a look at Snowflake as source, we have the movies table, and you can see I've got the movies stage. In my example, if I move this across, this will give you an indication of what I had to do for this movies table itself. So as I mentioned, we had to create the stream for it, and this is called movies_stream. And then we've also created a staging table, which I've called movies_stage. Those are the two requirements required for CDC. Okay, let's move this back over. So that's Snowflake movies table, and I have some existing data in here. So we've got about 10 records of my DVD collection. Not too great, but we'll add to it. There's going to be some change data we'll add to it. So we've just got 10 records at the moment. We want this to go into SQL Server itself. So let's have a look at SQL Server. So I've got my testdb2, as I mentioned in here. I'm just going to refresh that view again just to make sure there's nothing in there. And we can see there is no database in there for or no tables in there for movies. So this is part of the demonstration as well as moving data. I mentioned Arcion does all the hard work for you. Part of that is we're going to be creating the downstream structures as well. In this case, creating the movies table from Snowflake metadata. Okay, so now we've done that. Let's go back into our UI. Sorry, not UI, the client window. And here we're going to actually execute the command to run replication. So let me just take this and paste that in here. So what are we doing here to run this? As I mentioned, we went through the configuration files for connection, for filtering, and for mapping. And all we're doing is stringing this command together. So we're saying from this directory, you're going to execute in full mode. So if you remember, full mode was creating the schema as well as applying the data to the target. We can change that to snapshot or real time. But for this demo, we're going to stick with full. And then we're basically stringing together our YAML file. So the first one was a source connection, and that's to Snowflake. Then we have the target connection, the SQL Server. Then we have the extractor parameter. So these are the performance tuning, which we stuck with the default. Same for the applier on the target. And then we're stringing together what the filtering is. So this is telling Arcion what tables we wanted to move across, or if there was any filtering on columns as such. And then lastly, the mapping rule. So how are we going to map from source to target? And then we're using the replace write mode. Replace, if you remember, if there's anything downstream that's already pre-created, we're going to overwrite it. So, if there's data, we're going to truncate and reapply the data itself. Now, in my case, there's nothing downstream anyway, so we're going to create everything from scratch. So it's as simple as that. And I'm just going to go ahead and execute that command. So what's going to do here in the background is, as we initiate, we're going to be looking at the metadata between source and target. And as you remember, from a target perspective, there is no schema structure. Well, there's no table structure in there. So part of the job that Arcion is doing right now is looking at the metadata. It's going to go ahead and create the target table structure, and then it's going to start loading data from source to target. So let me actually increase that. So you can see now we're at that stage of moving the 10 records across. And it's our movies table. And one of the things about the client, which I love, it's very dynamic in terms of the progress that it illustrates. I've worked for competitors where we've had a client offering as well, but it's very static. In order to get update statistics, you'd have to keep on typing a single command over and over again, whereas here it's all dynamic for you. So we can see we've got 10 records that have gone down to the target. So let's go ahead and look at our SQL Server instance now. I'm just going to refresh my test DB2. It's just going to take some time. I've got several VMs running. But here we go under tables. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see movies table in there. And voila. So I'm just going to actually do a quick count on here. I'll actually do a select star or select on the table just to see the records and the 10 records that we had. So this is the initial load part of the segment. What we also want to do to illustrate, as well as building the tables and the existing data, is that we want to see change data within Snowflake being propagated as well. So again, I've got just a simple script that will take a few records. So as well as 10 records on the target, we're going to add 8 more records. So we're going to go back to Snowflake, and let me just paste this in here. So as I mentioned, we're going to add some records in here. We're going to add an additional 4 records. We're going to make an update to those records. So records 11 and 13. So you can see for 11 where we have Black Panther, we're going to update that to Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And record number 13 says Iron Man. We're going to update that to Iron Man 2. And we're going to do a delete. We're going to remove record number 12, which is Spider-Man No Way Home. And then after that, we're going to insert more records as well. So there's about 8 inserts, 2 updates, and 1 delete operation. So let's go ahead and perform that. Yes, we want to run all these statements together. So that shouldn't take too long. We're actually doing this at the source. We'll check the records in here. Okay, we can see there's 17 records, which is correct. We did do 1 delete. And we can see from an update perspective, records 11 and 13 have been there. So main thing has this been replicated downstream? So we can see within the UI as well, there's certain operations that have transpired. And at SQL Server, if I execute this again, we can see the same records again. So again, we have 17 records because ID number 12 has been deleted, but records 11 and 13 have been updated as well. So hopefully this has given you a good idea of Arcion, how simple it was to configure a data workflow, even in the client. As I said, it's a self-managed process. The UI will guide you through the process, but even the client is easy to do. All you're doing is manipulating a few files to input specific information that's required, and our documentation guides you through the whole process itself. So if anything has piqued of interest, there's an interest in knowing more about Arcion, or you'd like to discuss Arcion for your current project, please do reach out to us on our website. There is a contact us. We're also on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to discussing more opportunities with you in the near future. Thank you very much.